major session first and then a breakout session second, but scheduling being what it is, we're doing it the other way. So the History, Philosophy, Culture group was created to make it possible for philosophy of science, for history of science, and for culture of science to interact with the development of the next generation EHT project. So, for example, we have 4 focus groups, and you're invited to join any part of this you would like. But one of the focus groups is on collaboration, and we'll be hearing some about that tomorrow from Niels Martens. We have one of the groups on siting, and Ansi is going to be speaking a little bit about that today, because siting is not just a question of the water column or whether, observing nights per year or altitude or accessibility, but also about the interaction between astronomers and the host communities. So we know from experience on Mauna Kea and elsewhere that things can go wrong in a big way, and we want to avoid that and to think carefully, not just about technical aspects of installing a 8-meter dish, but also how to make the interaction with people who live in around the site as good as possible. So that's one of the tasks, one of the focus groups. Then we have a group that's been there established for a long time. We started it really at the beginning of the Black Hole Initiative and Harvard. It was on the foundations of physics, and asking questions about very basic aspects of general relativity, singularities, horizon, other things that might not come off in the course of calculation, but are of interest to philosophers, and we hope also to people working in the field. And some of these questions touch on the relationship of theory and observation, a theory experiment, and Jamie Elwood will be speaking about that tomorrow. We have a group on algorithm that will make contact, as all the groups will, with the scientific technical groups, but a group on algorithms, inference, and algorithms and inference is one of the 8 or 9 working groups that we have in the ngEHT, and this group is on philosophy of algorithms, inference, and visualization. And Yulish, who's here, will be giving a talk tomorrow about some aspects of that, and so speak some about some of the comments I made yesterday about the relationship between open-ended visualization and selective choice by priors and modeling other forms of data cuts. So today our goal is to do 3 things. We'll be here from Emily Skolberg, who is on the visualization side of algorithms and visualization. She comes out of art history and history of science. And she'll talk a little bit about the context of scientific visualization in black holes and astronomical imaging generally. She and a colleague at HPC who's not here, Beth Tesler, will have been working on it. And this group is planning on writing chapters, and it's writing a chapter for Galaxy's edition that each of the working groups will contribute to. So again, participating, it's an open-ended invitation. So Emily will speak, and we'll talk a little bit about that, and Ponzi and Thresher will speak as well about the siting. We'll have a chance to talk in an open-ended way about what history and philosophy and culture have, how different modes of interaction. In about 30 minutes or so, 20 or 30 minutes, Michael Johnson will be finished with this session. We'll come by, and we wanted to have a chance to talk about ways that the HPC group contribute to the science traceability matrix as we begin to think about the implementation. The final focus group that we have is on collaboration. I guess I mentioned that, but Niels is going to be talking about that. And that includes includes things like governance and what the advantage of different forms of scientific governance are, looking at literacy and IPCC, how it's what stands for. Climate change at the CC, international is the I. What's the B? Planning?
Intergovernmental panel.
That's a very dispersed group. And so we're looking at aspects of LIGO, the Change Provider, and IPCC as sort of three different interesting comparison points on governments, and then also how do you handle dissent in that collaboration. For that, how do you handle how does knowledge get produced in a curriculum? Something that what is the epistemology of scientific methods? And then there are very practical questions, which might be good to use our group to discuss things like they come up all the time, but questions of credit, who's an author, what is an author there? How do we recognize? We're at a moment in the PhD where there's a transition away from huge unified efforts and towards more open-ended exploration, and the ngEHT, which isn't, because it has no proprietary data, is very open and transparent. So it's an opportunity to think about these questions of collective production of knowledge. So those are some of the things that we have in mind, but the scope could shift and alter as we have there are 30 or 40 people that have voiced an interest, some from inside the ngEHT, some from the PhD, some from neither, who just were very intrigued with the idea of thinking about some of these questions at an inflection point in the development of a major project. So that's why we established this, and our meetings are typically very international. They're all conducted on Zoom. We have each of the focus groups meets, cadence of once a month or so, and then we have an HPC plenary meeting that's once a month to adjust these cadences as we see. So that's the sort of background to this, and what I thought I would turn it over to Emily, who will tell us a little bit about in a broader image cultural way.
So there's a presentation.
Yes, there's. Right, so I'm projecting enough. So I'm giving this presentation in part on the basis of a subscription for the Galaxy's paper, which was co-authored with Elizabeth Hester. So I'll be speaking about some points which are a bit thoughts in progress, so to speak, so that especially the philosophers might be interested in those. But also part of this is made together with Beth. So I'm presenting a little bit on the subsection, which is basically the draft is ready. You can all see it in the comment and suggest changes and things to add. We'll try our best in the 11 minutes. And then some extra kind of open questions, I think, which are typed into. So style is not something we've just seen with artworks, because all image makers make decisions on stylistic choices when presenting their research. So one art historian called Martin Kemp has emphasized that all images have style, including images in science. So even graphs Kemp calls non-style to indicate that the lack of details used to represent a sort of stylistic choice. So this is a kind of minimalism, which is also a style. And then, as Elizabeth Kessler and others have shown, choices in image making are influenced not just by scientific considerations, but they can also be based on aesthetics, including visual traditions outside of science, such as the landscape tradition in art history. So Elizabeth has shown that this was the case with Hubble Space Telescope imaging, particularly in those cases where they target the general public. Another example is diagrams developed by Richard Penrose, which were influenced by the artist M.C. Escher, as well as the tradition of space-time diagrams in physics. So on the left, you see our hand-drawn diagrams, which were included in Penrose's essay, which awarded him the Cambridge University Adams Prize. But what about Stalin images, which were not diagrams, functioning as tools for calculations, but to show what the region around the black hole actually looked like? The earliest representations aimed to show the shape of a black hole were in fact very diagrammatic. So, for example, in Guthrie's representation here of photon capture with curved black holes of different angular momenta, we see a very schematic style, even though the image shows what the surroundings of black holes look like. Very roughly. And then the same is the case for the work of Galison and Granada a few years later. We'll go very quickly through this today because it's just a 10-minute thing. But then in the later 1970s, we have these two representations which depicted the region in much more detail. So unfortunately, to my great frustration, I've still not been able to see this visualization here, which is a film clip. And apparently it's on this old film roll, and I'm trying to somehow get it digitized. Yeah, so I haven't seen it, but I do know that it was shown at several lectures and conferences. So you can see an example of that here. So Anru, who was one of the creators of this film clip, told me that they developed it in 1977 from summer to fall. Which means that if this is correct, I have obviously not been able to double check it, but if this is correct, it was the first detailed visualization of the region of that film. So, however, more well known, of course, is the visualization on the left by Dr. Henry, which was developed in 1978. So, in this image, we really begin to see the aim for visual realism. We may use techniques for drawing this image, which are well known to the history of astronomy, as in the history of astronomical drawing, which was used before we had astrophotography. So we use something called stipling, which is drawing basically little dots on the page until a space is revealed. This approach, of course, did not last in the production of visualizations and simulations. So simulations after the unit are entirely computational rather than handmade, but we do see something interesting. So rather than lines showing like just the rough shape, I think this approach to show the space around the black hole, I think of this is kind of a black hole chiaroscuro. It's so central to all visually realistic black holes. So Peter has also made a really nice comparison, I think, to Galileo's use of chiaroscuro in illustrations of the moon. So basically, he was well known for his expertise with chiaroscuro and perspective drawing, and so actually that made it more convincing to some audiences that his observations might be correct. Chiaroscuro is a method of perspective which shows shapes and spatial depth by using contrast between light and darkness. And of course, this is quite crucial in these cases, because how else do you express this kind of regional space-time? So Dubinet, he described his drawing as a photograph because he imagined an observer in space being equipped with a camera producing this image. He also described his image as realistic. And so this is a question I'm currently, one of the questions I'm currently interested in. And I think it would be great to hear your thoughts. So what does realism mean in black hole? So Dubinet, he aimed for visual realism and used drawing techniques developed for naturalism. But of course, he was not drawing from something he'd seen. So in an art historical sense, it doesn't exactly match the most common definition of realism. Rather, I think he uses naturalistic style to portray something he had not seen. So his reference to realism, from my understanding, is based on a mixture of visually realistic style and the fact that they're based on his calculations and simulations. So basically his best guess at what is out there. In other words, the realism we see with black hole visualizations on the basis of simulations is not based on portraying something we've seen, but rather what they think could be seen or would be seen in the future. So I think of this as a kind of naturalistic prediction. And then, of course, with Falcon media and the goals visualization, we find a different kind of naturalistic prediction emerging. So what we would actually see if we observed a Sagittarius star from Earth using the OBI. So when images like this were obtained, images showing what the shadow actually looks like are now tied to questions of evidence and existence, and perhaps also the question of what directness means, as Jamie has also worked on in relation to Michael. And this is very much part of the history of black hole imaging thought. So, in addition to epistemological and ontological questions tied to images, we can also consider just how important these particular images are. So I mentioned in the beginning how images are always part of context and often influenced by visual traditions in scientific disciplines and sometimes arts and other sources. I also mentioned that all images are style. These images are already very iconic, and maybe even you could say that they became iconic in the span of hours, given how widely it was shared on social media and on newspapers. So they shape how black holes are viewed, and not just by specialists, but also within the public. They've also come to represent black hole research as a whole. So even results on the information paradox are typically presented together with this image, which is a bit funny to me. Choices of style are incredibly important, I think, in the case of ngEHT and the next generation ngEHT. The choices made for images, they will shape how black holes are understood and viewed by huge audiences. So it's not just a question of which choices we make for a given image. To me, I think also in this case, image choices represent important contributions to the iconography of black holes in the world. So, how does the production of the images influence the faith image makers and their audiences have in the accuracy of what is depicted? How do color schemes and artificial choices influence the way different audiences see black holes? How can they understand exactly what the image depicts when these regions of space-time are as unusual as they are? I think that this maybe is part of the HPC component of the ngEHT focus. We can, amongst the many topics we can discuss. So we can reflect on these choices based on expertise with image making in the next generation ngEHT. And also with those of us who studied history and philosophy of images in astronomy and astrophysics. So we all know how influential ngEHT imaging has been. And now I'll quote from Beth, who wrote this part. So we all know, next generation ngEHT imaging represents an opportunity to consider once again how these imaging decisions, whether motivated by scientific or aesthetic concerns, shape the scientific and public perception of black holes, which I very much agree with. Thank you.
Do you have any questions?
Oh, sure.
People have thoughts or queries? Jamie?
It's amazing. I was just curious about if you have some examples of, particular choices that you could have getting made with the ngEHT images, and maybe if you could say what
so Beth and I were actually talking about this during one of the Zoom meetings for the section. And I think she had some really interesting points. Or actually, we both observed that maybe with the Saturday star results. So I was basically, because of when the ngEHT results were released, I was also supposed to organize a conference. So I was somehow trying to keep track, and it was really, really hard because it exploded. And all social media, the newspapers, all the different languages, like and the memes. I mean, yeah. So it was really a challenge to keep track of this. So when the Saturday star results were getting ready, I was studying with 2 computers, just trying to keep track of all the different social media, newspapers, and it wasn't the same overwhelming response. So one thing we talked about was if we use a different color scheme, will it seem like a more result? I don't know. Very much an open question, because on the other hand, I do like the idea of the approach that the HT has taken, which I find very respectful to the audiences. So they did not cater to expectations shaped by artistic visions, and instead chose to use an image which they found would easily enable them to explain what was going on with Black holes. And I think that with the first image, the reaction was in part limited, in part lots of feelings of awe, in part some people were disappointed because it wasn't the artistic vision, it wasn't interstellar. But then with the release of more images like this, I think it also shapes the expectations. So now the core image here really is what it's shown for so many different contexts. Honestly, I mean, that might influence visual literacy. I don't know what it's
We had an interesting discussion at the before issue of the Sagittarius A star image about whether we should use a different color scheme with the same color scheme. And one argument was that it would be good, it would emphasize to use a different, say, purple or some variant of violet. That it would emphasize to people that this was chosen, there was a degree of choice in color representation. But we also thought that on the other side, that keeping roughly the same color scheme would be contiguous and allow people to see them together, juxtaposed with each other, and focus on the differences rather than the similarities, as well as the differences in where the thoughts were. So it was something we discussed. But as you say, I think that I never heard any discussion about changing the image for just for the public. I mean, closest was this decision to release a single image that was an average, this image, on April 11th, made from 3 different pipelines.
Actually, in the case of the ngEHT polarization image,
Yeah.
I think, I mean, the usual thing that the community does for this kind of publication when you include polarization is just to add ticks of different colors that indicate different values and so on. But also following the results by the Planck collaboration, where they show the magnetic field with these field lines that are kind of more artistic in some way. Also, the paper coordinators also, and there was also a discussion to the decision also to include these figures in which the polarization is represented as these field lines that are really more aesthetics in some way, which tell, I guess that's to a certain point, at least in my opinion, it's telling you less information than the usual plot that we do with polarization, but it's for sure more appealing to the eye. And I guess in that case, maybe there was a decision to make it more visually appealing for the public, and which is also physically motivated. This is not just some random figure that is good looking. but there was that choice, I think.
That's a good example. Thank you. Yeah.
So this may be a bit silly, but you mentioned that when you were making the, well, previously the analysis of the surgery still unfinished, that you said format for it. And I realized that in the movie that came along with the release that was made by using several different wavelengths of duration. When you zoom into the black hole region, the satellites at the end, was there any choice that went into that? And was it scientific or?
So you're talking about the Zoom news released by ESA?
Yeah.
And the question is whether it was a choice about orientation or what?
Yeah, why was the need to filter it?
I don't know. I mean, I wasn't involved at all with that. It was a Zoom movie. Do you know anything about it?
I guess I don't know. I guess in the way the movie was built, which you zoom into the galactic center, it just I mean it just made sense to rotate it to so it's aligned with the respect to the plane of the galaxy. But yeah, I don't know.
And they were, it's merged. It's a sequence of stills that they've pulled in on and then edited together. Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I just don't know why they would keep the image plain and well.
Do you mean the image was prepared like this or making like this?
No, that the image was not aligned as it was with the graphic plane.
Yeah.
And then for whatever reason it rotated. So it was standing.
Like the circle rotated?
And that's the image that they showed for. I don't know. I mean, it's just silly. I don't know why there was a need to do that.
Yeah.
Another question. I don't know if it's for you or somebody else here. As a new member to the corporation, I was wondering what kind of decision process went into the choice of that color scheme, like those colors for the images, and yeah.
For that, I can answer because I was one of the
Okay.
people that made sure that color. So we had a discussion, and one of the choices was to make it. And people said, "Well, the hottest part of the flame is the blue part, not the orange part, right?" Because there's a lot here. But I thought, and I think others also, that if you put a sign on a refrigerator, you use blue to be like ice. And if you want to warn people not to touch a stove, you don't make it blue, you make it red or orange. Or you think about red hot as being hot. And since this is 12 billion, 10 billion degrees Kelvin, the plasma that's around the black hole, I thought it was good to convey that warmth, and I think that people tend to agree with that, and I'm not alone in that feeling. It's a collective decision. And then this projection isn't perfect in color registration, but it's a very specific orange, and CK Jack, who's the final palette choice, shows I thought a beautiful, got a very specific name, general, remember. Of course, in the image itself, the relative brightness is real, but the color is completely chosen. So since it's in the far infrared, you can't see it, so it has no intrinsic visible color. So so I think it was designed to convey the heat of the plasma around it, and then in the spectrum of things in the range of colors that we convey that we chose from that aesthetic grants. It's a nice palette. A lot of times color palettes in science are color palette that's offered to you on your computer usually are pretty terrible, and they're ugly. And so we chose from a non-standard within the range of what we're trying.
I was wondering if the choice of these different colors help the visualize like details, because like the choice of the color scheme like linear or non-linear changes how you see details in the image.
Yeah.
Okay. This had some particular characteristics about that.
I mean, it's the two things. One is we made choices, but then also this projection, the actual image is smoother and the transition from the orange to what comes out as yellow. That's just got to do with the building which projector. We should move to.
Yes.
Velocity, pressure, say a little bit about, we're really just beginning to put together our the citing group. It's the most recent of the 4 focus groups. So Onsi has been thinking about these issues in other areas, and this and in all the groups in comparative studies are helping us to think about these things.
Yeah, so as we said, this is a relatively new topic that I'm getting into right now. I said a little bit about telescope sighting for probably about 6 months now. And sort of the start of like some conversations about broader aspects of telescope sighting. So I'm an ethicist as well as philosophy of physics. I'm at Stanford at the School for Sustainability. There's a lot of parallels to be drawn from the questions of telescope sighting, what looks like happening in the environmental context right now to do with weight-based nuclear power sources, where you stick solar panels, where you release geothermal organisms to release species and malaria. And so there's not a huge literature of conversation right now about telescope sighting. Or there is, but none of it is, formal. Strongly really care about this sort of thing, like obviously the EHT and ngEHT that care about these things. But what I'm sort of trying to do is bring across these lessons to get a bit more of like idea of what these sort of like progressions have made in our areas. So the question I sort of want to ask, and I'm sort of trying to open discussion here, I'm not trying to tell them what I'm doing right now, like this is the very beginning, so like back and forth is useful. We're sort of asking like, what are the non-technical aspects of sighting we can address? We've had a lot in the last few days about the technical aspects of sighting. Maybe not quite right word, but like, you know, how high up is your telescope? How thin is the atmosphere? How cold is it? Does it have resources? How much is it going to cost to build? Right? Those sort of cost-benefit analyses are really great and they're important these things. But there are other aspects of this that are really important as well. So things like whether you've got buy-in from the community, what the environmental impacts of the site is going to be, who you need to talk to and how you need to talk to them to get them on board. We're all very aware of these kind of problems, especially in the face of things like the ngEHT telescope here and problems that encountered. And so this is conversations happening, which is like keep having these conversations as we go forward. So there's often I think a perception that, as I said, it's quite a technical thing when you place a test telescope. It's sort of just like transmitting optimization systems to an optimal output, projected facts out of this telescope site. We just plug it in and we get out the telescope sites. But even in the technical sort of abstract, there's no judgment calls and all the things going in. So we talk about things like what counts as a harm when you do risk assessment, or what we value, right? And scientists have values, we want to discover things and find new stuff. But communities, governments, individuals often have different values than scientists. And so if we're trying to avoid conflict, we're trying to be good and progressive about the way we site telescopes, we should be. It's a necessary part of finding out, the necessary part of siting is finding out those norms, whether they're religious or cultural or aesthetic. We don't tend to want to put telescopes in national parks for various reasons, right? Like people have preferences. So we listen to those and do that siting. So yeah, and they'll bring new and often very useful perspectives to the conversation. And so result of communities can make a difference when we're building telescopes. Okay, so as I said, the good news is that a lot of other groups of science are also making sleep and science conversations. I worked a lot with groups at East San Diego doing geodating on mosquitoes to the original area. And they have almost exactly these kinds of conversations, right? There's not just sociologists, philosophers, historians, biologists, geneticists sitting in rooms together, having conversations about who determines where we where we release these things. What are the implications of releasing them in places like India or Africa, which are traditionally colonies of like the West, right? So Western science movement is always like baggage on top of that. It's sort of what I'm going to do right now is sort of like go through some of the lessons that they've learned. It's like starting point for these conversations here. So here's things that they've sort of noted as things to worry about, or like things they found really useful when they had done these sorts of conversations. So one of the big things is inviting communities as early as possible. The moment you've got an idea for a site, like going in and talking to people, because communities can be more receptive when they feel like they're a part of the conversation from the beginning. It's important to have a two-way dialogue in these spaces. It's not a case not just that like we're talking to them, but like that we're listening and making changes based on what they're saying. And part of that, as I say, is the recognition that sometimes you're going to get a no, right? We know that no is a real answer in the community sometimes. And like that's obviously the extreme end of this, but like they're not going to feel like they're being listened to like the state game unless you really have these conversations. Okay. A lot of studies have shown that one of the really like important aspects of like going into communities is centering trust. You've got to build trust with the local community, and you've got to provide lots and lots of information. The information was pretty clear and important because if you're not providing the information you need, they're going to go elsewhere for the information you need. And that means they tend to find outside sources that are reliable, biased, or they give them no idea what's going on. So you're the experts, we're the experts in this, right? We really should get this information. And it's important to take advantage of local knowledge in these things. It's not like us going and trying to like convince them things, like they have stuff to do to that. Whether that's local knowledge about resources, about the way the weather actually works around here, supposed to studies about how to really like what those roads are really like when they're coming down, right? Like local knowledge is really important. We're having these kinds of conversations. It's important, it's really important to not fall into the trap of scientific versus indigenous knowledge, right? We have a tendency to think that like Western science is this like special important thing and like governments, but like indigenous knowledge has these knowledge, right? I mean, it often comes with a long history of like rich discussion and dialogue, not just from religious perspectives, but you know, take places like Hawaii or New Zealand, where like there's a long tradition of looking up and thinking about astronomy. That's information for us. It's also been noted quite extensively that one of the big things to do with science conversations is double-check this table, right? So often the people who come to talk to you are people who have skin in the game and who are in a place where they can come to talk to you. But the people who are not at the table are often poor, are minorities, who are potentially excluded from the area. And let's face it, often all these people are the ones that are going to be the most impacted by these groups and live in the fringes and that sort of thing. So it's important not just to notice who you're talking to, but who's not being represented in those conversations. It's important to notice our context for all these reasons, right? Particularly when we're in places like Africa, Hawaii, you know, anywhere that like has been colonized in some way, shape, or form, going to have these problems. This historic context can be a problem for information, right? There are a lot of communities who survive because they're not communicating with the government, for example, like they've learned to not give information. And so that's how they've gotten through sort of like kept their own culture. And so again, it comes from trust and being able to work with these things. It's also important to recognize that all of these are monolith, right? Like individuals with different opinions, different cultures, different communities, adjacent villages with different ideas goes on. And particularly like getting approved from government is not the same as getting approved from groups. And just in general, thinking in terms of mutual ongoing benefit, right? Like these are relationships we're building with these communities. They're going to be supporting us in some way, shape, or form. And so make sure that not just that like we're getting benefits from them in terms of like having the space to build our things and bringing resources, people, and like this live in that, but like they're also getting benefits from us coming in, whether that's resources or you know, education or the chance to work with telescopes, that sort of thing. So I'm going to end with a couple of questions that I think are useful to answer afterwards, some of these problems. So in general, what does good sighting look like, right? Lots of people are sighting telescopes, but like when we start having broad conversations on like, okay, we're building a telescope, like what are the sorts of things we need to start talking about from the get-go? What does it mean to be ethical and like good, kind sighting people as scientists, right? How do we bring other communities into the project? Right, we're starting this conversation as early as possible. What other possible issues do we need to address, right? Beyond just community collaboration, just things like environmental factors and most other things, many of which like I'm sure you've thought of that I'm not yet, but like we need to sort of like think about this sort of stuff. And then finally, just note like every site is going to be different, right? We can ask these questions in the world context, but it's going to require us going and actually figure out what's happening, right? Building a telescope, so we mentioned yesterday, telescopes in Greenland maybe very different thing than telescopes in Africa, which is very different telescopes in Hawaii, which are different than telescopes on military bases, which are different telescopes on national park mountains, right? So like being like proactive about the kinds of the information we gather and like recognizing like there's not like one simple set of answers for any of the telescope type projects. Right. That's it. Thank you very much.
Good answer. Have some questions? People have thoughts, reflections, ideas?
So, I think the rest is under people function, but of course we all know about the like problematic situation. What I think would be interesting is to know whether in other cases like that we just community and I think that only that there were those it would be sort of good to have like a database of situations where things were always wrong. You know, how many cases there were and cases where things right is the main drawer and success stories. I imagine people were not each other's things.
I have a student, a former student, Leandra Swanner, SWANNER, who wrote a very good piece. She was a student in history of science, but she also taught for in astronomy, and she had respect of the Irwin Shapiro, because they worked with her a lot. And then she also spent a lot of time both in Hawaii and Mauna but also in Arizona. And so if you want to see a piece by her, I collected a citation, find it. Now it's not just a piece, Leandra Swanner. I think that's a very good piece. She really tried to understand the different ways that so
I mean, another example is the psychometer in Africa, right? So they had issues with a similar idea of this extreme use of people were less populated, but they needed land, and so they were receiving farms, right? Like, you know, they were paying the farmers for them, but they basically went like, we need a huge amount of land for this, like, this is it. And they had a lot of problems. Something we should be aware of is that, like, one of the things was they overpromised under it. And so they think, well, we're only going to need 2 farms with land. I'm sorry, we're buying it out with a farm, and it ended up being connected. And so, like, and there were other issues there, like, the local farmers were worried about the knock-on effects to the economy in the area, right? Like, losing that many farms would have really impact on, like, the village. There were other things like it was going to be a dead zone, right? Like huge amounts of areas that we wouldn't be able to use, like rural homes and stuff. Like that was a real problem for the groups that lived in these areas, right? It's like they had to build these revolts and try to figure out alternative communication. They promised to bring in like to help the community education. So they brought in like physics and maths teachers, but only one village. The rest of those are like, well, this is like we're also having all these problems. Like, how is this like helping us? And so like these sorts of problems crop up. Not only is it an extreme problem, but part of that is just that it's an extreme one because it actually interrupted building the telescope. That's why we recognize this extreme. It's just in a lot of other cases, like the telescope just gone ahead despite the roads. these projects and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, one thing also, I think already a bunch of telescopes on their mountain, and I think it's because it's $1 billion facility, you know, it's place. It's not. So okay, kind of going to your question, I would love to know more case studies of success stories, and I'm curious whether you think that there's something very different about sighting a telescope versus, say, ecological monitoring stations or weather stations or other things where they'll drop these all over the globe. What are the parallels? Is there something you learned from that?
Yeah, so I think the differences, like similarities and differences, are really interesting in these kinds of cases. So the similarities are things like being to consult the community and like the relatively example if you're using a study case. On the other hand, it's clear that like when I say we're going to come in and release a bunch of jam, go find mosquitoes, see the malaria there. The worst how about that are not the same kind of rising as like a telescope, right? But on the other hand, when you ask them, when they ask what are the benefits of this, in the malaria case, you can say, well, we're getting rid of malaria, you're not going to die from malaria anymore. And they say, like, and it's very much true that like if you run studies and they ask Americans, how would you feel about releasing mosquitoes in India to get rid of malaria? People really love it. People really feel comfortable with that because like the idea of have more species out there, it's changing, it's like really scary. But then you go to India, you ask them, they're like, oh yeah, get rid of mosquitoes. They're killing everyone. Yeah, they can absolutely do this. It's like there's a lot of different like changes in that. So they can see the benefits. So like in many cases, like the downside is like all these like scary things you see kind of gentrification, for example. But on the other hand, the point of what's going to be good to them. Whereas the telescopes, like there's all this like big scary thing that's happening. But on the other hand, if someone asks what are my benefits, I'm just my backyard. Now we're thinking about like education, these kinds of things. Because we're saying, well, like we're going to send this data back to America and it's being processed out these images that tell us about the galaxy. And I said, well, like, why is that helpful to me? And so like there are upsides and downsides. It sounds like rather an innocuous thing in some shape or form, but like also very abstract. And so it's on the ground.
I do feel like the outputs are much more tangible, right? When people, when genetic stuff was released, the people associated with those facilities, they feel ownership of it, right? The validity, they feel like they were part of creating something fabulous. With other telescopes, right, they produce this vast body of very diffuse knowledge, and I think it's harder to make that sense. You might be proud of the facility or something, but I think it is a special project in that we can forecast concrete outputs and say like this thing, this first movie of MD7 is really big deal, and you're going to be part of that, right? And make sure that there's something where we can find victory and let these communities celebrate that.
I think it's a really good way of framing this, especially for the LGBT. Like, having that be front and center is not the average, so pushes the narrative is like a really good way to change the way the LGBT is like perceived in these groups. Yeah.
It seems to me that there's one of the constants in people's interaction is about respect and people feeling seen and respected and heard. And I think that some of that is very practical, like if you say we're going to encourage exchange program or with students or help the local technical college, or I mean some of which has gone on quietly. I'm like, hey, it's not gotten much publicity, but Jess Betsy was very involved with high school and college programs. And then some of it is, or some of it might be, there have been jobs and people, the telescope people would often say their jobs, but most of the jobs on the camp traditionally been low level, low paid, and the Native Hawaiian community on the islands is much poorer than the non-native population. And so it's a big deal. And so if it's possible to, if it's possible to engage at least some people who would rise up, especially young people who might want to learn about astronomy. I think that could be important. And then I think the slide we had about not contrasting with true knowledge and mythological indigenous knowledge is very important. People have to, our side, the astronomer side, needs to get really serious about that and not treat it as point to, strange knowledge, but it's actually, interesting and learning something from it. I mean, it's why they've been using the stars and waves and wind to navigate thousands of miles for centuries, and there's a lot of knowledge that goes into their interaction with the environment. I think that learning about that could be a celebratory act of respect that it shouldn't just come as an afterthought. And it can't just be casual. It's got to be, it's got to be.
Represents like ownership, right? Like, so what you were saying earlier, like you said, they have ownership of these things and they're a part of it. It makes a huge difference. And so, yeah, like it's mutually beneficial, right? Like these aren't that they're complementary topics. Like what we're doing here with the ngEHT is not like like somehow dominant over or like coming in and taking these groups with better information, better knowledge, or right from like essence and stuff. Recognize it's like shared human teamwork history, astronomy, stars. Like recognize that like stuff is not there, like that's the case, but the long history like that continues in what we do today at the ngEHT. And like emphasizing that and letting that be true, right? Not just with like cutting off the traditional like what we do here, but like recognizing that like these are like they should be pulled back and forth.
Michael asked a question which I thought was interesting at the beginning of this intervention, which was, are there cases where scientific projects have been successful in their engagement with community and both sides have come out feeling good about the way the interaction went?
Can't maybe keep these elements in telescope stuff.
Doesn't have to be telescopes, any domain.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's a bunch of stuff in gene editing, for example. No one's deploying genes yet, but like, there's a lot of really positive interactions in India and Africa about like, what we're going to do with these technology testing already, right? And like, as I said, the technology's not ready. We're looking at 10, maybe 20 years to deploy that. But they're already talking to the communities they're going to come into, and the communities are already buying into these kinds of like moves, this kind of like science stuff. Right, they're excited for it. They want these things to happen. It's because it's like a mutual dialogue. And like the scientists, as they look at these things, are listening to what they're worried about, and like what's like risks they're concerned with, and like it's bringing not just like community, but also the government in, like having sort of like combined conversations. And it's going to crazy time. We're super successful in those spaces. And so, as I said, like first thing is like getting it early. Right, like they've got to feel like rather than you come in with a full plan where you're like asking like, we've got a plan, do you say yes? Right? That's just going to get pushback. We're thinking about doing this, like how would you feel about this? What are we going to do? How do we like make sure this is mutually beneficial for everyone? Like just having that different attitude is huge. So like these groups respond and like successful collaboration.
I think it's really important. I remember when we had our meeting, the EHT in Hawaii a couple of years ago, before the pandemic. I heard from people that who knew about local protests that the lasers that are used to create an artificial star to measure turbulence in the atmosphere and these things were it was a conspiracy theory that these were laser weapons that were being developed at the observatory. The observatory actually is a military facility and these were covert laser weapons being. So I think that fixing something after the fact is much harder.
I usually just had a conversation with one of the astronomers in the Global Agreement Project, which was like, it's almost impossible to not convince people that we're transmitting with telescopes. Like they can see a telescope, you get people busy with their transmitting, listening on the conversations, and they're like, this is one of the reasons like information is important, like getting ahead of those like conversations and like not letting it get out of control. Like here's theories like this. There's a lot of stuff available online now. Want to be like giving them good information, not like these kinds of things sort of like. It's hard. Like, that's hard to do. Like let's face it. Like solutions to misinformation in science. I would not say here. I would say the process of sort of solve all of it.
It's hard. I mean, think about our lack of success in Europe and in North America in communicating with our own countries about COVID vaccines and other health.
I mean, even things like, wind farms are making so this, because like, they're very benevolent, you can see the benefits of them, like. There's a lot of people out there reading them because they think they could be heads, right? And there's numerous studies that show that it's not a phenomenon, like wind farms, but like that myth is perpetuated and through now, you're projecting to the because of this information. Just Google wind farms and suddenly they get like side effects. So,
Thank you. That's great. Michael, since you're here, I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about the science traceability matrix.
Yeah.
And how this group, what would be useful if we could, what kind, you have ideas about how this might go?
Stand or?
Yeah, I think this is a standard solution.
Yeah, let me give you a sense of where we're at on science traceability matrix, right? This is really an exercise in honing our vision. The science groups are good at coming up with every idea under the sun. They're bad at saying we want to do two things, right? So it's this painful process, and then it's really hard to say we know what we need to do that. It's like, how do we know what we need to make a movie of something no one's ever seen before? It's a really challenging process for scientists who are used to being hyper conservative about everything to then say, okay, if you give me this instrument with those parameters, I promise you that I will deliver this thing. So that's a painful process. Now, HPC, this is a new element on the SDR process, and I think it's really exciting to think about integrating it at any stage of it. So the stages that I would envision are that, one would be a key science goal that's actually directly informed by the types of ideas that you're discussing. I don't think that's impossible, especially on say the inference, the algorithm side of thing to say, yes, conventional interferometry says this, but actually we know that the claim certainty requires a different type of instrument specification. But it can inform how we're stating our requirements, inform instrument requirements. We can integrate these citing considerations into citing requirements. If that's funky and it doesn't really capture the spirit of this, there are lots of downstream areas where this can still be integrated, right? So there's the level 0 science requirements, which are these top level, hyper refined things. There's level 0 associated instrument requirements, which again are super high level. It doesn't tell you how to build something. It just tells you bare minimum requirements that we know we need to do this science. To say, it's not, it'll say something like, we need a dynamic range of 1,000 to see the jet Sagittaire star based on our current best knowledge of the system. That's nowhere close to telling you how many telescopes around the world and how big they have to be and bandwidths and all these details. So that's why the systems engineering team has structured this as level 0, level 1, level 2, and level 3, and so forth. And all of these details, that when we're talking about citing requirements in a way for, say, community engagement, that we're going to write into a top level requirement project, that's still probably going to appear on the SDR. But Janice Houston gave a talk on the operations concept where she has some high level requirements like the instrument shall support external observations, external requests for observations and so forth. And I think it'd be really interesting to think about those kind of top level requirements from these discussions, where they could be very flexible, right? We're just formulating them now, and honestly, I'd rather integrate something that's imperfect, just to give ourselves, just put the pin there and allow time to iterate and see, how we want to define that. Because otherwise, I'm so worried that we'll just sink into a business as usual mindset that review panels will say, oh yeah, that looks like what we're used to seeing and so forth, and we'll miss the opportunity for something really revolutionary. So that's kind of my perspective. I'm so open to ideas about any part of the process, but really I think role in this will probably just be taking your ideas and steering them to the part of the project where they'd be most effective. So, yeah.
But, well, I think I talked with this local part of the APC group, and over the last couple of days, and I think people would be quite enthusiastic about trying this out, because it's also nothing that the property science that are trying to do. So I think it could be quite interesting. And if we can, for instance, in the collaboration focus group, we're talking about things for governance and what to actually articulate some of the aspirational ideals of what governance would be like, even before we draw a wired diagram of who reports to whom. Just like, for instance, representation important to people, and things like that would be.
Well, but then I think that's why this is such a nice opportunity, right? Because I think what you are probably equipped to deliver is the aspirational, high level, not a wiring diagram. And that's the thing that can be written in right now. But we can just demand the collaboration structure, or governance, or management structure, or the science structure, or whatever, adhere to guiding principles, which could be very specific or could be broad. And then we don't have to worry about shoehorning it into some well-defined structure after the fact. So I actually think these top-level requirements, like what Janice was talking about, is be a great place to start. I mean, I'm sure Janice would be happy to come to an HPC meeting, just to brainstorm this. I'm a very poor representative on this, really more of a liaison or something. But yeah, happy to brainstorm any ideas you have. And I guess just to me, the expectation is that this will be difficult, right? We're going to pick something. I've never heard of another project doing this. And I feel like it's so important, right? HPC it's one of the science working groups. It's parity with everything up to our top level. We will not build the instrument if we can't do this science. So I just don't want to miss the opportunity to do something amazing.
So I know people do you have questions or thoughts? I have a question for Michael. And that is just to review, is the Galaxy's volume that we're doing organized in chapters that correspond to each of the working groups?
They don't have to. So it ultimately will form a science book, and we will probably collect those in sections, project level stuff, and maybe organize our working group or rest of or something. But the submissions can be anything, and I'm not at all worried about organization and how they're written.
I just wondering, like the other working groups, we have what, 8 or 9 working groups? Eight. Are the other 7 working groups each submitting a document of one kind or another?
No, not all of them. I mean, the reason I initially thought this was a good idea is that they've written up these nice summaries for the science requirements review. I thought, why not create a special issue where we can submit these? But then some of the working groups say, well, actually, we have 20 things we want to do, right? And some of them are like, well, we write our papers in a different way. So this will not. If there was a single HPC contribution, I think that'd be amazing.
That's what we're aiming for.
Yeah.
I mean, with an introduction and 4 sections corresponding to collaboration, citing, foundations, and algorithms, inference, and visualization.
Yeah, no, I think that's ideal. If it explodes and you want to do one on each, that's also fine. Or, but I think the crosstalk among the topics in a single document is really powerful.
And the Galaxy, in my ignorance, I've not actually read it in the past, but is it? It's an online journal, is that correct?
It's an online journal. We can get print editions, so we will probably order books because they're cool. It's open access. It's not predatory or it's not pure. And I'll tell you, I was nervous about picking this, and one of the reasons I did is they pointed me to one of their recent special issues, and they were articles written by, top-tier scientists, that articles with hundreds of citations. This is it's a serious thing. So yeah, they'll be indexed everywhere. They'll be free. They'll get a lot of this.
Sorry, one last technical question is then each of the chapters and contributions will also be a white paper and a kind of ngEHT library of white papers. Is that, will there be a place you go on the ngEHT site and you can see what the white papers are?
Yeah, so I'm envisioning that the ngEHT science book will be the set of all documents, technical memos, special issues and everything. So this is a subset of what will be eventually the science book. We'll have to figure out how to organize it based on what people are submitting. And this is just the first step. It's the inaugural ngEHT science submissions. I think this is a special set of our articles that are going to set the.
Sorry, so the science book is something that's going to be, you expect to be done in the next few months, or is this years?
It will continue to grow with the project. And if it's a successful format, it could still be adding to it in 5 years. Some of these other major facilities have very extensive, like the square kilometer array and GBLA. These are $1 billion facilities, so it's kind of a different category, but they'll have hundreds of contributions. And it's honestly, it's just a nice way. If I was going to go look up all the EHT articles, usually I'll just go and look at all the articles that cite, paper one or something. Some very clumsy approach. It would be nice if the EHT had kind of a catalog that's organized in a sensible way of all the papers that kind of build out the ecosystem of science. So I really like the idea of doing this in a deliberate way for the ngEHT, but also allowing unexpected contributions. So yeah, it's going to be around, it'll keep growing. Eventually, it'll become a concrete thing. So it's
The most scientific articles also have a corresponding white paper to join this collection.
Well, I would consider scientific articles to be part of it as well. It's fine if they're published in other journals. If they're published